we've been talking about the Civil War, and last week we did a letter by Major Sullivan Ballou, remember? Kind of like the big long love letter to his wife. It was on his deathbed and all. So we're going to kind of continue along that line and talk about some famous diarists and why details are important to historians and why details really could be important to anybody. But what I want you to come away with is to understand how personal accounts give a little bit more substance and context to history rather than just what you might pick up by reading a newspaper article or a textbook about an event. The work that's going to be done is all in this class period. There is a diary analysis worksheet that I'm going to hand out in just a minute. After we do some of the information, you guys can pair up, and I took some excerpts from this one diary that I printed out that you're going to have to read, and then while you read, you can fill out the worksheet with your partner. And the purpose of that is to help you learn to figure out, pick out some details that are important and figure out what's relevant. Okay, so famous diarists. Everybody probably knows one famous diarist. Somebody tell me a name.
Anne Frank.
That's it. Anybody else besides Anne Frank? Why was Anne Frank so important? Why was Anne Frank's diary so important?
Because it was one of the only personal accounts of her own life.
That is true. Louis and Clark. Very good. I didn't put a slide on them, but yes, they have a very famous diary too. And why is theirs so important?
It showed how the West was like how the mountains were.
Right. Well, does anybody know who Samuel Pepys is? Samuel Pepys was an English naval administrator, and he lived back in the 1600s, and there's a picture of it. And he was one of the very first diarists that they have a historical record of. He kept about 30 years worth of diaries, and he apparently never intended for them to be public because he went to great lengths to write it in a very cryptic code, and then he hid them and he bound them up. Some people kind of expect that their diaries might be made public, and they don't go to quite such lengths. Christina? Exactly. Anne Frank had named her diary Kitty. And that's a picture of her actual diary. And there's little Anne Frank. What's the definition of context? James?
It's kind of like where you put it. Like you use context clues to figure out what a word means. You look at the surrounding and look for stuff around it that can be meaningful.
Exactly. So why does context matter when you're talking about diaries and journals?
Because if you don't know the context in which they're writing, you really can't step into their shoes and understand what they're actually writing about.
Exactly. Sometimes details help put information in a better context, right? When might details be important?
When you get attacked by someone and you're describing what they look like to a sketch artist.
Exactly. Why would a historian value a letter or personal diary over some other account of an event? James?
Because like when we're doing history for our projects, we're constantly being told the best source is the primary source, someone who was there.
As Walter Cronkite once said, when seeking the truth, you have to give both sides of the story. Diaries provide both sides of the story.
First-hand accounts also are more sensory. Like they tell you a lot about the food that they were preparing and games that they played and how much their bonnets cost and things like that. Diaries tell a lot about your social class and your education because a less educated person won't be using all that flowery language like we're going to read about today. This is the diary we're going to read today. It's Carolyn Howes Richards, and she was born in a little town in upstate New York called Canandaigua. And it's still there today. It's a very quaint little town, and it's about 300 miles from New York City. She was 10 years old when she started keeping this diary. We have a diary analysis worksheet with some questions that you need to be answering as you go along. So we know that the range of the entries were from 1852 to 1880. And who was her audience? Who do you think she was writing for? Yes. What do you think?
I said it was like to anyone, so like they know that who she was in the first line. I said I will write a journal about life.
Right. So you might infer from this that in the future she might suspect that her diary becomes public or famous, right? She wasn't writing in code and keeping any secrets, right? The paper asks, what are 5 experiences that she describes that you picked up on in the journal or in the diary?
Was like when like everyone was celebrating the fact that they won the award because Lee signed it. She was really excited, and everyone was like there was a bunch of noise and parading like down the street.
One more experience she describes.
Her grandmother's death.
Yes. Can you make some kind of inference about what was important to Caroline when you read her diary?
The fact that her grandparents like took the time to raise her and like family in a way.
Family. When the Union soldiers took the east coast of Florida, they took Jacksonville, Bernardino, and St. Augustine. One of the first things they did was shut down the newspaper and rev up their own version of the newspaper, which is where we get the, what's the name of our paper?
Florida Times.
And that's why it's called the Union.
Oh my God. Why were they doing that? Because
they wanted their side of the story.
yeah, man, they don't want all that, Confederate news traveling up the East Coast. They wanted to get their side of the story out.